In May of this year, fighting erupted in Western Equatoria State that left over 200 people dead and close to 100,000 civilians displaced. The government recently relocated General James Nando and Angelo DeVito's forces. Will this bring an end to the conflict in the state? Join us as we discuss this and more only on Beyond the Headlines. Our guest on the program is Mr. Edmund Yakani, the Executive Director of Community Empowerment for Progress Organization, abbreviated as CEPO. Mr. Yakani has extensive experience in research on security sector reform, governance, human rights, rule of law, and gender. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for welcoming to your program for the third time. I'm honored.
A government delegation met with General James Nando of the SSPDF and the militia leader named Angelo DeVito, who is alleged to have ties to the SPLA-IO, to address the ongoing conflict in Tombora. What led to the meeting between General David Nando and Angelo DeVito, given the news reports indicated it was not long ago that General Nando fell into an ambush and was almost captured by forces loyal to Angelo DeVito. Of course, during that time, General Nando was able to escape into the bushes. Also, what were the resolutions that came out between the government and General Nando as well as Angelo DeVito?
Thank you very much. As your audience are listening, it's a really continuous story about the conflict in Tombora, which all of us are wishing to see solutions to the Tombora crisis. And of course, as an activist, as a facilitator who was closely engaged on Tombora, I would like to take this opportunity to respond to your question, but maybe what I would like to tell everybody very clear in this interview is that I have no any interest behind the situation in Tombora, neither I have alliances with any either of the fighting parties. So I'm completely objective to stand for the best interest of sons and those of Tombora. That's what I would like to make in first place. But as you said, is that a delegation left from Division 6 of SSPDF from Meridi training site and went to Tombora. And this is after, of course, we have made a lot of quiet interventions to find peace in Tombora, but all those interventions couldn't work out. And that is followed after when the JDB, which is a Joint Defense Board, were assigned to go to the ground to execute one of the resolutions that in several meetings have come out, the resolution of demilitarizing Tombora. And the JDB were there for almost 2 or 3 weeks. They couldn't really make a headway in demilitarizing Tombora. Their forces are resisting, preconditions coming from one conflicting party and another. So at the end, the government have to move an SSPDF leadership from Meridi Division 6 to go to Tombora. And really, when they went to Tombora, in less than 2 days, they make a tremendous positive changes that has brought positive situation in Tombora. And among them is reallocating the forces belong to General James Nando, who is a member of SSPDF, to Meridi, and then the forces belong to David DeVito, who were relocated to Rilango. And that have created a really big positive change on the ground. And in that meeting, one of the things that they have agreed upon is that first, the forces that are fighting in Tombora should quit Tombora. And of course, that is the forces that belongs to General James Nando and the forces that belong to DeVito. So they have to be moved. And each of them have to side with the formal forces that signed the agreement. So General James Nando have to report to SSPDF based in Meridi, and Angelo DeVito have to report to IO based in Rilango. And that has happened. And then I've immediately realized the situation whereby the markets of Tombora open up. And why the markets of Tombora open up? Because it's one of the resolutions of the meeting between the government and the two fighting forces leadership that immediately what they want to do, if they agree to be allocated out of Tombora, then they need to go to a peace rally. And that's why maybe you might have seen pictures, images, and some videos trading on the social media where in Tombora Freedom Square, General Nando and DeVito and the leadership of the SSPDF that left Division 6 from Meridi were addressing public, and public were really very happy to see that there's a peace rally happening on the ground. But besides that, still citizens have concerns about the sustainability of these demonstration of positive move of where forces of General James Nando were moved out of Tombora to Meridi, and Angelo DeVito were moved from Tombora to Rilango. So that's a positive development, but still citizens have concerns about their individual and community safety and security.
Yes, that is an important point you've raised, because there's that question of what is the possibility of another military confrontation taking place between the SPLA-IO, the SSPDF, as well as the militia group under Angelo DeVito. Now, a few days ago, the SSPDF spokesperson, Brigadier General Lul Roy Kwong, released a press statement in which he stated, SSPDF headquarters would like to announce to the public that it has successfully completed relocation of General James Nando's forces from Tomboro County to Meridi Unified Training Center, where they would undergo training and integration into SSPDF. Maintenance of peace and security falls under the command of 6th Infantry Division, South Sudan National Police Service, and National Security Service. General James Nando has returned to SSPDF headquarters, Bilpam, to await further directives. So what is the possibility of another confrontation among the parties?
The first factor, it is truth or sincerity or honesty around the move of the forces in terms of individuals and numbers on the ground. Because one of the factors that may likely trigger potential return is if the reallocation of forces is not done accurately in terms of really the numbers that were moved are actual numbers from both fighting forces, and have the all fighting forces really moved their forces. Some of them are not undercover among the civilians. Those are some of the facts that need to be proved by so much engagement and by so much digging out about who is left behind. And still, we are hearing this narrative, which for me is a disputed narrative of armed youth. Really, I don't think this narrative of armed youth is a correct narrative. It's a narrative for covering up some individual or some forces. So we need to see, because if you see the outcomes of the relocation, then they say later on they want to deal with the armed youth who are remaining in the community. Who are those armed youth who are remaining in the community? To which of the two fighting forces that do they belong to, and why are they left on the ground? So the question of truth in numbers, in terms of have we moved all the numbers that constitute what is called the force of General James Nando? Have you moved all the numbers of the force that constitute what is called the forces under Angelo DeVito? So the numbers matters a lot. And I think this, for me, for us to avoid a return or a possible confrontation, is that actually those who are behind the move of the forces have to constitute a mechanism that follows the implementation of the demilitarization, and to make sure that at least we have a watchdog that it can watch up to the villages, because the citizens still have tendencies of fear that they believe some of the troops of these forces have melted into the population and they're undercover, they're waiting for any trigger. And I think that requires trust and confidence building by the government, and especially the joint government, the IO and the SSPDF, to have a joint body like JDP that follows up who is really moving with arms, why are they moving with arms, why are they, for example, like doing some constituency or constitute themselves to stay in certain locations. Those facts need to be established in order to win the trust and confidence of the citizens. And remember, as we're speaking now, there are almost around 4 IDP camps within Tombra town. Those IDP camps today, if you go to them, still tendency of fear is in them that they believe, yes, of course, the forces are relocated, we're jubilating, the market is opening, we have seen life coming up, we've never had gunshot, we've never had incidents of killing, but we still believe that there's some individuals who are in the community that need to be dealt with. And I think that particular question of some individual in the community need to be dealt with, need to be properly studied. And I think for me, if you ask me what we need to do in avoiding confrontation, is independent verification body have to go to the ground, cross-examine, and not just an independent verification body that goes for 1 week or 2 weeks, an independent mechanism that stay together with the communities and take long time and watch out who is mobilizing, who is regaining. That's one thing I'd like to bring to attention. Secondly, during the reallocation, I hope that the reallocation will open a window for recruitment of civilians into forces, because sometimes the behaviors of our organized forces that when you're talking about relocation, they start mobilizing civilians and forcing them as a sign of relocation. And that become a point of recruitment, which I think also for me, it's a concern that both parties have to be checked that they are not using reallocation to again recruit young people into their forces and show them that these are the numbers that we're locating them. So those facts need to be verified by an independent entity. Second factor, political sentiments that may come out of politicians. So the political elites whom are actually behind this conflict, whether they're based in Juba or they're based in Diaspora or they're within Tombra, the sentiments, they need to change the language. We need to have a change of language that leveling blame to certain particular community need to be stopped from today, because those sentiments are the triggers. These sentiments are the fuel that fuel tension. So I wish that the political elites start changing their sentiments from sentiments of blaming, leveling a particular group as perpetrators to sentiment of reconciliation, forgiveness, opening a new chapter, and we must avoid violence. Violence is not an option. Violence never gains. Those are the political sentiment we want to hear from politicians that comes from Western Equatoria State and in particular from Tombra County.
During our first interview, you mentioned that there was confrontation between Alfred Fortuyo's SPLA-IO forces and James Nando's SSPDF forces. Now, when I spoke with General Nando, he stated that those are false allegations, that there was never any confrontation between the two forces, and he actually has a friendly relationship with Governor Fortuyo. He also stated that the conflict in Tombora in Western Equatoria State was a result of disagreements between the Balanda youth and the Zande youth. Therefore, there was no influence from politicians or the military or the governor. What do you have to say to that?
The facts remain. Why should he fall under several ambushes? That when he was in Yambio, when he was going on the ground, those ambushes, that's one fact that remains. Of course, that fact does not mean, and I remember in the past interview I said, there's no physical evidence that we can really establish from a research background that can establish against the governor, that it can come in. But as his confrontation is really going directly under confrontation with Angelo Davido, and Angelo Davido, when we see the demilitarization of Tombra, Angelo Davido, where he's belonged to the IO, he's now relocating to the IO side. That means if you are to do thorough research and fact establishment, you come to realize that actually he is receiving aiding from the site where he's now taking refuge to, or he is returning to, which is the force of the IU, that's why he's returning to those forces. Then what does that mean in terms of a leadership and military structure on the ground? Yes, he bring up that's his facts, that's his position, which I respect. But what I know also is that the truth is always bitter. And normally when the truth does not favor you, you tend to stand firm and to make sure that you dispute the truth that does not favor you. But of course, I know in terms of the arrangement of the peace agreement in chapter 2, where SSPDF and IO are peace partners, obviously you can't go public and dispute that, because that factor might have generated. And then you start asking questions. When there's the tensions going on in Tombra, why names of General James Nando and the name of Angelo Davido come in confrontation? And you have seen quite a number of incidents happening in the towns, attacks for commissioner, even he being fall under attacks, the paramount chief falls under attack. And until we lost the life of the former commissioner, all those confrontations, the question you need to ask is, who is behind the supply of the bullets? Where Tombra is not close to any country that manufactured bullets. Then that means behind this particular argument, you will establish a tension between players that might have contributed to the situation that have made the situation in Tombra to unfold.
What led the government to finally take on the decision to confront the issues that are taking place in Tombra and Western Equatoria State, and that has been occurring for several months?
Obviously, of late, when the situation is unfolding and we're losing lives and IDP camps are building up, that have drawn attention of international community to go to the ground at level of UN Security Council. The Undersecretary for Peacekeeping have to visit Tombra. The head of UN Peacekeeping Mission in South Sudan, the SRG, Hasten thing, have to visit Tombra. So there's a regular presence of international community in Tombra. And besides that also, there's a quite good reports coming from international human rights bodies like the United Nations Commission for Human Rights in South Sudan is issuing reports on that. And of course, we are also engaging in several events. We have a couple of a tour to the ground, to the state. We went with the elders from both communities. We met the governor, but also we had a couple of meetings in Juba among the elders, and statements are coming out in several media. So that have drawn the attention of the national government, whether really they have responsibility to protect the lives of sons and daughters of Tombra, and that have raised a question of political will. And besides that, by the way, This incident happening in Tombra is happening in the phase of implementing the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan. And remember, justice and accountability is a key principle in Chapter 5 of the agreement. So also some principles are aware that the situation in Tombra will never go without being accounted for, because documentation of human rights violations are already going, leveling of certain leadership going. I think that has made leadership at the national government to have an attention of making sure, no, we can't allow the situation in Tombra to continue, because numbers of IDPs are building up, and we can see very clear that humanitarian situation is growing and becoming more tough and more challenging. So that will draw the attention of the government. And partly I will say also, the role media have played with regard to Tombra, have bring attention to the top leadership of the country.
With the withdrawal of the forces loyal to General James Nando and Alfred and Angelo DeVito, neutral forces are going to be sent to Tombra. Which are the neutral forces that are going to be sent there?
I think when you talk about neutral forces, it's going to be forces that are mixed up of the parties that signed the agreement to be on the ground. And in terms of also background of individuals, maybe individuals that come from these communities or comes from ethnic groups that does not belong to the state, so that at least they're becoming people who have no any direct link with whatever disputes are going on. Though I still dispute it, and I do agree with General James Nando in terms of the youth on the ground are being fooled. And that's why for me, the facts come to that you need to have a force that have no direct link with any either of the youth that disagree when they started creating tension among themselves, having target killings, burning of villages, burning destruction of farms, because the youth is started. Later on, it attracts the formal forces that comes under Angelo DeVito and under General James Nando. So for me, if we need to have a neutral forces, neutral forces that have nothing to do with any communal ownership or any communal dispute in Tombra. And that means other communities of South Sudan, sons and daughters, will be deployed as a neutral forces under the government to be based in Tombra. But still, I would like to say, even if we deploy a neutral forces, if the political influence on the situation on the ground is not being corrected, is not being changed, still, even neutral forces will never do, as long people can make phone calls and complicate facts and put things that are not real to trigger violence. Still, even if they have other South Sudanese are deployed as a forces to the ground in Tombra, they will never overcome the situation as long the youth are receiving aid and receiving influence from some people who are behind the curtains.
Yes, you know, Angelo DeVito raised this concern. He stated that people in the diaspora are sending money that is used to purchase weapons and really fuel the conflict there. Do you know of the individuals or entities that are actually funding the conflict in Tombra and Western Equatoria State that are from the diaspora, or have you heard of such an issue?
Obviously, as a public sentiment, you can hear from both sides accusing diaspora of both conflicting sides that they are fueling this, but there's no physical evidence that you can use it and you can label as physical that we have seen transfer of money, purchase of weapons, but even at state level, if you talk to political leaders at state level, they still also blame the diaspora. But honestly, as a researcher, I couldn't really have a physical evidence at hand that I can prove that the diaspora have been sending money or they've been sending to. But also we have had sentiments of some people who are speaking through using social media as a diaspora, sending messages, we're standing behind you, we will rally behind you. What does that rally or what does that stand mean? Whether it's a financial value that they are sending to the ground, there's no physical evidence on that. And I wish that those who are blaming the diaspora, they should come with physical evidence so to help people like us to dig into the in-depth when they have produced, there's this transfer of money. But it's a general sentiment that you can hear from both parties blaming their diaspora community that they are fueling. But also I've seen cases in social media where diaspora are playing a positive role. They're sending a lot of signals. They really send messages like, stop this rubbish on the ground, stop this nonsense on the ground. It will never help us, neither any either of us will gain. I've seen positive messages from diaspora in social media. But obviously, social media is a platform that also can hear negative messages. Like what I'm sharing with you is that sometimes after these interviews, I do receive from both sides that, you are biased, you have been bored, you have been paid for, while actually I have never received any penny from anybody. I'm so objective. I've never taken side with anybody, but I'm setting the truth on the table. Sometimes the truth is bitter. So this element, diaspora, are contributing, whether positively or negatively, requires an evidence. But the negative side that diaspora are fueling in buying arms and sending money for buying arms, that's a bit problematic. I found no physical evidence to prove that. But of course, in social media, there are voice of diaspora who are sending messages that are fueling violence on the ground, as equal as some of the diaspora send also positive messages to build peace, to make sure that actually the situation on the ground is sorted out.
Mm-hmm. What is the current state of daily living for the civilian population in Tombora and the surrounding area? I know you mentioned that the market is open and people can go ahead and trade as well as purchase items. But what other sectors of the society has been freed in terms of the services being available to the citizens and the citizens' ability to be mobile and move around freely without much concern?
When you talk of trade, you are talking about local produce. That means that, and that's why if you look at images of pictures that are in the market, most of it is really local produce, vegetables, greens, things that are produced locally. They are selling it, and mainly it's centered around food security, much more of items of food that are locally produced. But in terms of presence of liquidity and presence of cash in the hand of the citizens, it's not there really, because Tombora is locked for quite a long period of time since May. Access outside Tombora or access to Tombora by other traders from outside is really, really very hard. Roads are very poor. So I would say per now, the market is open for local produce. So other sectors, for example, like the textile sector, or by then if you see there's these motorcycles that we call them border traders who move between Tombora and the neighboring country of DRC or Central Africa. They are not yet, they have not resumed those trips, or business community moving from Yambi or Tombora taking goods still. So what is in the market now is what has been caught in the hands of the traders during the crisis that they are unable to sell. This is what they are selling now. But of course, as I said, the life is improving within Tombora. And that also depends on how much is the national government going to sustain issues of individual safety and security in terms of mobility. How safe are people if that move out of Tombora to a bit far distance or even to the villages? Up to now, as we're speaking, yes, the market is opening. People are living in the IDP camps, but yet indicators of IDPs have interest to return to their abandoned villages still is not high. So most of them are doing more of a search, more of a seeking whether really their areas are safe and they can go back. So it's fine, like people visit, but they don't visit as regular. They just want to see exactly, yeah, the village is free from any individual may take away their lives or may target them as they're going to the villages. So still is early to say mobility is completely improved. Is mobility within the town and is sense of safety and stability within the town, but outside the town, still much work needs to be done. And I think this is where I would like to make a call. The leadership of Western Equatoria State government may need to have an urgent political tour to Tombora and move a bit distance outside Tombora to build confidence and trust the people that at least we can see the leadership at the state level have stand behind us.
General James Nando stated that, you know, he has agreed and accepted to have his forces moved to Miridi. Also, Angelo DeVito, of course, has accepted to have his forces moved to Rirangu. General Nando stated that it is the SPLA-IO who are in the bush who are resisting to be relocated. What is happening in relations to the SPLA-IO? Why are they not abiding by the agreement to be relocated and to ensure that there's a stability within Western Equatoria State?
And that's why I was really raising the question of numbers. If you talk about numbers being relocated, which numbers will be relocated? Which individuals will be relocated? And we say people are relocated, is it in uniform? Even if those who are not in uniform, in civilian uniform, are they relocated? And that's why there's this notion of in the agreement, or even if you say after the public rally, it's still the language of armed youth, which I think for me is a really disputed sentiment or praise that requires more attention of the leadership from national government and at the state level also. The leadership of the governor, there's a need to really go to the ground and iron out this element of some few individuals among one of the conflicting parties is refusing to quit or to leave the villages. And that is still offer a high deficit in trust and confidence for population like the IDPs camp to go back to the villages. If it's still such sentiments are coming out from people like General James Nando that are telling the truth that, look here, yes, I've moved my forces, but still forces that are loyal to one of the conflicting parties with me doesn't want to move out to the villages. That particular message still will give people in the IDPs camps the resistance to leave. And I think that's, for me, the leadership of the state is now high time for them to prove that particular sentiment wrong by going to the ground and making sure they do rallies, they work together with these youth. And you need to start working on youth peace building projects where the youth start reconciling. And those who are armed, will they should find a way of being reallocated, or the arms are collected from the hands and end up as civilians, or if they still insist to hold arms, they should belong to either of the parties, either IO or SSPDF, and they get relocated to their bases, Wilango for IO, and then Meridi for SPDF. So for me, that particular sentiment that General James Nando raised need to be properly dealt with and need to be followed up. I don't think that that will help people in the IDPs camp to have trust and confidence of returning back to their villages. So for me, it's also leadership of the state to respond, and the leadership of the state to show an action that still those who are resisting to move, they have to be moved out of the villages to the locations where they belong to.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, can the current semblance of stability be sustained, or should there be a continuous monitoring of the warring parties in Western Equatoria State by either the Joint Defense Board, CITISAM, and groups like the UN Commission of Human Rights in South Sudan?
I think that they still need to create more pressure for gaining stability in Tombra. Citizens need to be there to respond to some of the concerns that still there's armed individuals of any either of the warring parties does not want to move on the ground. Citizens need to be there, monitor, track them, follow them. And still we need to maintain the presence of the peacekeeping, the TOB in Tombra of UNMISS, and this TOB or the base of UNMISS in Tombra need to move to the villages, specifically the sites where it's been banned, to watch out the lives of individuals and communities. If they return to those areas, are they safe? Still that need to be assessed. And still, of course, justice and accountability not need to be ignored. Remember, even within the meeting that was held in Tombra and the meeting held in Juba among the politicians that come from Tombra at national level, there's a high call for independent investigation of the situation that drives to hold perpetrators accountable. So justice and accountability should be used as an instrument to sustain pressure on whoever want to ignore peace and stability in Tombra. And that's why regular, continual investigation by the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan is very important. But I think also government need to consider its own investigation that is impartial, that is independent, to come out with a clear sentiment that actually, or with a clear report, who are behind this and who will be held accountable. Because if we ignore justice and accountability, perpetrators of violence will still come and will spoil the gains that we have gained in these 2 weeks or 3 weeks in Tombra. So for me, there is still citizens need to have presence, JDB need to have a presence, human rights institutions need to have a presence, UNIMIS need to have a presence for at least for a longer period of 6 months. Then from there, we can draw conclusion that those who are fighting in Tombra have agreed to allow peace and stability to prevail in Tombra for the best interest of sons and daughters of Tombra in their various communities.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Edmund Yakani, the Executive Director of Community Empowerment for Progress Organization, abbreviated as CEPO. Thank you for joining me here on Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you too for having me in this particular interview.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page at Sunrise Media.